What's up everybody, Brett here, back with Game 3 in our Best of 3 2v2 series against our host Imba Extreme on multiplayer. This game is Total War Warhammer 2, and for those of you who aren't familiar, I'm going to go ahead and slow it down a little bit and kind of explain my units, my allies' units, our opponent's units, and just kind of the general choices for my gold expenditure and my deployment choices. So here you see I'm playing Brettonia. I went with King Lewin on his Hippogriff Biqua, and I opted to bring a Paladin with him with the Guardian ability and a basic unit of Pegasus Knights. Having this little mobile goon squad is very valuable if you believe that your opponents are going to bring a lot of ranged units or siege units, and having them be anywhere on the battlefield as kind of a mobile anti-large option as well. They double as a artillery cleanup and anti-large goon squad. So that's why I like to bring them. I do have a caster, Damsel of Life. She only has 2 spells, Waken of the Wood and Earth Blood. And those are very cheap healing and damaging spells that proc her passive ability Life Bloom, which will heal my entire army every time she casts a spell. So knowing I was up against Tomb Kings, kind of the high DPS of my army are these 4 peasant bowmen with fire arrows. Having them in the back line, kind of taking up position on this high ground here. They're going to do extra damage against the Tomb King units and any units with regen. So that's why I like to bring them. They also have decent range and they're cheap. And if our Tomb King opponents decide to bring Ushabti with great bows, such as these Chosens of the Gods, but let's say they decide to bring these guys and the cheaper Skeleton Archer variant, my Peasant Bowman will trade quite effectively against them. Now, looking at my opponent's builds, I can see because they saw that I was playing Brettonia, they expected lots of cavalry, and I know this because they brought cavalry of their own on Tomb Kings, which is very unusual, as well as a large number of Cold One riders from the Lizardmen. Now, I do believe they have one Horn One unit here, and a unit you don't get to see very often. Very awesome, powerful unit, heavily armored velociraptors, lizards riding lizards, and they are ranked all the way up. They have tier rank 9 chevrons. You'll see those gold chevrons next to their XP moniker, denoting their increased stats. So these guys are very fierce. We're going to have to pay special attention to them. But expecting us to have heavy cavalry play, when in fact what we have here is a very wide formation of basic spearmen at arms. And I expected constructs, and I was not disappointed. Our opponents actually brought several large units on both of their armies. The Hyro Titan, with his 2 bound spells, good for sniping down lords. 3 units of Necropolis Knights, as well as the Ushabti, are all excellent targets for my very cheap spearmen at arms. The Lizardman player opted to get 1 Bastiladon with a solar engine, a kind of a medium-ranged artillery piece that does fire and magic damage, and it's going to be very powerful at attempting to snipe down my cavalry or my Pegasus Knights. 1 unit of Fire Leech Bolus, which if they're able to get into my backline unimpeded without taking much fire, they can cause a lot of havoc. And they brought Krokgar himself, the oldest Lizardman general, 10,000 years old, atop his special Carnosaur, Grimlock, I think his name is. And it's just a little bit of lore for you. There's lots of lore in this game. If you know the lore, a lot of these battles become more enjoyable just for the pure thematics. He went here on the Tomb Kings. He went with a basic Tomb King Lord, so no named Lord here. The Tomb King Lords on the Cimmerian War Sphinxes can actually be extremely expensive. They can be about 3,000 gold, which for those of you not familiar is definitely on the upper end. They have a lot of abilities, and it appears my opponent took almost all of them as I'm looking down on the bottom left. I don't recall a lot of the names of these abilities offhand because they're not something you see very often, but some of them apply melee attack and melee defense buffs to nearby units. See here he has Tomb Strike, which is going to apply an increase in weapon damage. and make him generally just a better fighter, one-on-one. And I believe he also has the curse, which when he goes below 50% health, it'll do a damaging effect to everyone in an AoE. And I did bring some cavalry. I brought one anti-large Knight of the Realms, and I'm keeping them in the back line as a sort of mobile defense force for any constructs that want to break free, or any of this cavalry. Now you'll notice I started with the Knights Errant in this special anti-infantry formation out on the flank, and that was because had my opponent gone with a very wide skeleton-based army, I was prepared to use them as almost like you would use Warhounds. They're 700 gold, they're the cheapest cavalry Brettonia can field, and I was willing to use them to harass the backline so that our ranged units could do work. But seeing that they don't really have a vulnerable backline, I decided to pull them back to defend my own. Opponent's moving out here to engage our High Elf ally, who went very small in his army selection, very elite. He has 2 units of Phoenix Guard, which would be excellent against any large unit. They have a natural physical resistance, and these guys basically fight to the last man at 95 leadership. Just an amazing unit. They also brought one of the Sword Masters of Hoeth, powerful anti-infantry, and to those of you who might not be too familiar, these guys carrying great swords, they look like they would not be resistant to missile fire, but they are. They actually have a unique ability called deflect shots. Basically in the lore, these guys are so awesome with their swords that they can cut down arrows mid-flight to protect themselves. So they do actually have bronze shields. And our ally also bringing Lothern Sea Guards with shields. I would say in my opinion that may be a bit of a waste. I think the Lothern Sea Guard themselves are an excellent choice, as having them be hybrid spearmen units is very beneficial against the large constructs and dinosaurs that the Lizardmen and Tombkings often bring. However, I wouldn't expect them to get out-skirmished, so the shields may be a bit of a waste. That's about 100 gold on each of them. 100 gold here, there, here. You know, it starts to add up. You take one less spell on your lord, next thing you know you can afford another spearman unit. You know, so a little bit of efficiency can go a long way. They also brought one unit of the Sisters of Avalorn, a choice I like a lot. Even the basic non-Regiment of Renown unit does a ton of armor-piercing, very long-range missile damage, which is also flaming and magical. And against the Tomb Kings, that is amazing, because a lot of their units are weak to fire, and can be heavily armored as the constructs are, and the Sisters are an absolute terror for Tomb Kings to deal with. They brought one dragon, a Sun Dragon, that's the weakest of the 3 tiers of dragons. I would say that was a good choice. You don't really need the heavy-hitting, very expensive Star Dragon here. If you're going to couple it with the healing from Alariel the Radiant on her Great Eagle, a Sun Dragon can go a long way in a fight against basic spearmen and low-tier cavalry. And she actually doesn't have all of her spells. She has very few spells. She has Shield of Sapphire and the Life Bloom, so that every time she casts spells, she does heal her entire army, as well as provide a map-wide physical resistance buff. And Earth Bloom, as well as her special Star of Avalorn. So we may see that proc at some point in this battle. She may cast it. You'll notice it's like a little star that goes up in the air and makes like a little healing AoE for her units. So without too much further ado, let's go ahead and put this in real-time speed. And here I was hoping to snipe out this Bastiladon with Solar Engine, but my opponent, bringing forward his skink cohorts with javelins who do throw poison missiles, I realized that if I stayed around for another second longer, this poison would slow me, and I would end up fighting all of these low-tier cavalry units, and then Krotgar would get in, and before you know it, I would lose quite a few of my Pegasus Knights. I didn't lose a model, I took some damage. There we go, a little side strafing. I was able to dodge the Bastiladon Solar Engine's first shot. And the Chosen of the Gods, absolute terrors against my peasant bowmen here. They are anti-infantry. You see that kind of burst firing that's happening. Right as it almost hits your unit, it explodes into multiple missiles, and did quite a number against my peasant bowmen. Kind of the hallmark of Brettonian infantry units is their low leadership. So you want to keep your infantry high and tight with your leadership, so that they fight to the last. Here I'm going to get a very nice, well-timed Awaken the Wood, and that did a ton of damage against these tightly packed skeleton warriors, softening them up before they get into combat. Providing a little overwatch fire here for my ally, knowing that they are fighting these Necropolis elites, which are armor piercing, have poison attacks, and seeing kind of the staggered way in which our allies are engaging, helping my ally to nuke down these guys so in order to free up their ranged units so that when the time comes they can provide overwatch for my engagement. Tomb King's player here is getting in deep with this Tomb King, and the Cimmerian War Sphinx definitely has the mass to push all the way through any of these units that he wants. But seeing that he's kind of isolated in the back line, I'm going to send in my Knights of the Realm who have the mass to pin him down, and they are anti-large, and I'm going to send in my Flying Goon Squad of anti-large units to hold him in place. And let's see if we can't burst him down over the course of this fight. Holding my Knights Errant in reserve, pulling back my routing Peasant Bowmen into this fight to try and get these Pterodon Riders out from above my front line, because they're just dropping fire bombs on all of my low tier infantry, and they're going to do quite a bit of work. Trying to keep my guys up with some healing, casting it wherever it's needed. Poor Knights Errant taking a ton of damage, but I am slowly being enveloped by these Cold Ones and Horde Ones. These are the ones that I'm most afraid of. They will destroy pretty much anything I have. That's not my Flying Goon Squad. Opponent using his Skink Priest of Heavens to cast the Thunderbolts, which aren't very good against what he's casting it against. I believe they have a bonus versus artillery, which I didn't bring any. Had I brought some trebuchets, that's pretty good at taking down single models. Here I rush in my Knights Errant to support my Spearmen. Knights Errants are made to fight infantry, and this isn't a great fight for them, but it is holding this flank down, allowing me to reposition my Spearmen. I'm going to look to intercept these Horn Ones here with my very mobile anti-large force, and this is the exact fight I want them in. On any other target, these Horn Ones would have done a great deal of work, but against this force here, they're not going to do much, and we're going to pad their numbers with these men-at-arms with pole-arms, which are probably going to be MVPs this fight.
Quick march! Shift it!
Get some cinematic shots of the Hyro Titan shooting his laser eyes. He's surrounded. He's surrounded by very high tier and low tier Spearman units and Halberd units, and he's not going to have a good time with that Sun Dragon beating on him with his huge weapon strength. And we're taking these Horn Ones to school. They are Rampage, so they are staying in the fight despite being broken. And some big misses by the Solar Engine. I've seen quite a few big misses from him that, had he hit this clumped up blob here of high tier cavalry and infantry, he would have probably started to pay for himself. Constantly looking for routing units, trying to redirect my fire here. My units are routing this way, so as I get them, I'm trying to pull them back to the relative safety of my ally. Here's the Star of Avalorn, keeping the Dragon Princes here, the High Elves' highest tier cavalry, keeping them in the fight. And you see this is some very powerful overwatch coming down on this Necrotech from the Sisters of Avalorn. The Necrotech was probably hoping to keep some of those constructs alive, but unfortunately for our opponent, he threw away his 3 Necropolis Knights against very powerful anti-large units early on in the game. So here we're bringing back our Goonsgod from tracing off the Horn Ones, because we see that Krotgar has now been engaged, and he's going to be taking down the Spearmen. And we're propping them up with Knights of the Realm, which are actually a decent fight here against Krotgar and these Spear ones, these Cold One Riders, not the Spear variant. These are actually the anti-infantry variant. And we're just giving them a little help with these Peasant Bowmen. And I actually didn't go over too much of King Lewin's kit, but it's going to come in handy in a second here. Krotgar has popped Deadly Onslaught as well as Sacred Spawning, giving him some physical resistance and some pretty heavy armor-piercing damage. but we've got him surrounded. And in a moment here, I'm going to start using some of King Lewin's abilities. Once I see some of the leadership on my units is starting to waver, and I'm going to pop Stand Your Ground to keep him in the fight, as well as some of the debuffs that King Lewin can apply in an AoE. The Sword of Corone, and yeah, just trying to focus down King Lewin when he has the 18% ward save from a nearby Paladin's Guardian ability, as well as his own innate regen from the Blessings of the Lady. He is not a good choice to try and snipe down. You end up wasting a lot of your DPS trying to focus him, and here you'll see some of these buffs and debuffs go down. My ally has won his section of the fight, so he's able to push off and chase off a lot of our opponent's units. Krotgar is going down quickly. King Lewin is giving him the business, waving his sword at him. And that is the game. So very good game. Lots of small tactical decisions there to make. I think one of the things I did early that was maybe tactically interesting was pulling back the Knight Errants. You have to have flexibility in your builds. The Knight Errants, I saw right away they weren't going to be useful for their intended purpose, so I pulled them back, and I used them as a means of defending my back line. I think that was a good decision right off the bat. Having this mobile goon squad and recognizing where the threats were and not overly committing them to bad fights, but really picking and choosing my battles, which is what their mobility allows them to do. So getting that Tomb King off the field after he got into our back line, taking advantage of Krotgar's isolation late game, we were pretty much able to solo both of our opponent's lords just using that strategy, and took almost no damage to do it. Meanwhile, our damsel with the Lore of Life and her Encourage ability kept our front line healthy and fighting for as long as possible, allowing our archers to shoot for as long as possible, and allowing our cavalry to screen out a lot of the units of our opponents. Now, I will say, in Big Stream, when we talked, he did say he was a newer player, so I definitely saw some of that throughout our 3 games. His somewhat wasteful use of the Necropolis Knights in the opening battle, even had he sent these guys kind of around the flanks in the similar way that the Lizardman player did with his Cold One Riders, he would have caused a lot more havoc with these units. Sending them straight up the pipe against an entire High Elf line of, I mean, even their ranged units were anti-large. So that wasn't quite a good use. And he expressed to me that he had trouble identifying the sort of paper, scissors, rock, anti-large, anti-infantry, style of what fights against what. That is the Total War Warhammer combat system. So, and I understand that, and I let him know that, these were kind of key choices that maybe cost him the match. These guys, I would have expected them to get around 80 kills each had they been used correctly. And their Hydro Titan as well. By the time he engaged with the Hydro Titan, a 2,000 gold unit, he had no support. If you're going to field a unit like this, you want it to be surrounded by allied skeleton units, so that it itself isn't taking the damage, it's just allowed to freely do its damage and get off as many of its casts as possible. It also has a passive ability, and this is another mistake that's worth noting here, not to tear down our opponent, but it is good to learn from your mistakes. So let's point out that the Hydro Titan does have a passive ability that increases your Winds of Magic regen, and our opponent here did not take any magic. These Necrotechs don't use Winds of Magic. They have healing abilities for constructs, but they don't cast Winds of Magic. So our opponent with no spellcaster wasn't really taking advantage of the synergy with the Hydro Titan, and that was a bit of a mistake. Chosen of the Gods always perform. They're almost an auto-include. And the Lizardman player did fine. There was a little bit of terrain in that map that probably caused the Bastiladon to not get the best lines of sight on his attacks. And these Horn ones, I think they're about 1,400 gold to only get 7 kills. And then when you pump all these chevrons into them, I don't know what the final cost is, but it's probably quite expensive, somewhere in the 16 to 1,700 gold region. To get 7 kills on them is super not worth. So they were good games, and I was able to kind of sharpen up my skills by playing, maybe a slightly less experienced player, but also hopefully by giving him advice was able to give something back and an appreciation for his sticking with us for 3 games. And it takes a good sport to play 3 games against someone who you know will probably beat you, and to keep playing anyway and then to ask questions to try and get better. That takes a really good sport. So just want to say thank you to my opponents, Imba Extreme and Norzad, and to my ally Grumpy, and to all you guys watching. Once again, my name is Brett, and my channel is Good Talk Gaming, and I'll be bringing you lots more of these Total War Warhammer 2 games, as well as any upcoming DLC in the future. And if you're checking out my channel, you're seeing that I do play a lot of different games, and hopefully you see something else that you like and you want to stick around and watch those videos as well. So without too much further ado, hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you in the next one.